torches didn't flicker. They roared. In the cavernous great hall of the Blood Moon Kingdom, flames devoured the darkness with a hunger that matched the wolves gathered beneath vaulted stone ceilings. 300 bodies packed the space, their breath fogging in the mountain cold despite the massive hearths burning at either end of the chamber. The air tasted of wood smoke, spilled wine, and the metallic tang of dominance that always clung to gatherings of predators pretending to be civilized. Arya Thorne moved through the chaos like a ghost. Her bare feet made no sound against the flagstones worn smooth by centuries of ceremony and bloodshed. The rough wool of her servant's dress chafed against skin that bore too many scars to count each one a lesson in invisibility she had learned over 14 brutal years. She carried a tray of wine chalices, the hammered silver catching firelight, as she wove between bodies that never acknowledged her presence. To the nobles laughing and drinking, to the warriors still wearing their battle leather, to the ladies draped in furs and jewels, Arya was nothing. Air. Shadow. Less than the hunting hounds sleeping by the fires. She had learned to prefer it that way. Being noticed meant pain. The Great Hall had been carved from the mountain itself 3 centuries past, when the first Alpha King claimed these peaks and declared them sanctuary for the Blood Moon Pack. Stone pillars thick as ancient trees supported a ceiling lost in darkness and smoke. Tapestries depicting wolves running beneath full moons hung between iron sconces, the fabric so old the threads had faded to ghosts of their original crimson and gold. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a dais of black granite, stood the throne. And on that throne sat the reason every pulse in the room beat just a fraction faster. Daemon Blackwell, 32nd of his line Alpha, King of the Blood Moon, looked like war-given flesh. He sprawled in the massive chair with the lazy confidence of a predator who had never met an equal, one leg hooked over the carved wolf's head that formed the armrest, his posture speaking volumes about his complete lack of concern for the celebration happening in his honor. The throne itself was a monstrosity of blackened oak and iron, built to accommodate the enormous frames of Alpha King's past. On Daemon it looked almost small. He stood 6 feet 7 inches when he bothered to stand fully upright. Broad shoulders strained against the black leather of his formal tunic, the material tooled with intricate knotwork that probably cost more than Arya would earn in 10 lifetimes. Dark hair fell past his collar, perpetually disheveled, as if he had just come from battle or bed and cared equally little about either. But it was his face that made grown warriors look away, made ladies whisper behind jeweled fans, made children wake screaming from nightmares. A scar bisected his features from left temple to right jaw, cutting through one eyebrow and narrowly missing his eye. The tissue had healed, raised and twisted, pulling his face into a permanent half-snarl that made his rare smiles look like threats. Other scars marked his throat, his hands every inch of visible skin. Arya had once heard a visiting lord say that Daemon Blackwell looked like he had fought his way out of hell and forgotten to leave the demons behind. She believed it. Everyone did. The scarred wolf, they called him. The Iron King. The man who had taken the throne at 19 and spent the next 13 years drowning the kingdom's enemies in their own blood. Arya kept her eyes down as she moved along the edges of the hall. Kitchen Mistress Rowena had been clear about tonight's duties. Serve the wine. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not meet anyone as enemies. Do not under any circumstances draw attention. The last instruction came with a sharp look and the implicit threat of consequences. Arya knew too well. 3 circular scars on her left forearm testified to what happened when she failed to remain invisible. Boiling oil had a way of teaching unforgettable lessons. She topped off chalices without looking at the faces above them. Laughter boomed around her, voices raised in celebration of the king's recent victories over the raiding parties from the southern wastes. 15 enemy wolves dead, their heads mounted on pikes at the kingdom's border as a warning. The feast had been going for 3 hours, and the wine flowed as freely as the boasts. Arya had already refilled her tray 7 times. Her hands ached. Her feet bled from a cut she had gotten that morning scrubbing the kitchen stones. The rough wool dress trapped heat against her skin, despite the cold stone beneath her feet making sweat trickle down her spine. She had been awake since before dawn, had worked through breakfast, service, lunch preparation, and now this endless evening feast. Rowena would keep the servants working until the last noble stumbled to bed, which meant Arya had hours left before she could collapse on her pallet of straw in the servants' quarters. If she was lucky, she might get 4 hours of sleep before the pre-dawn bell rang, and it all began again. The wine on her tray sloshed as someone bumped her from behind. Arya caught the chalices before they could spill, her reflexes honed by years of navigating crowded spaces where her existence didn't matter. She glanced up just enough to identify the obstacle. A guard, one of the king's personal security, stumbled past her with the heavy gait of a man deep in his cups. Garrett, she thought his name was. New to the castle, transferred in from one of the border outposts last month. He didn't apologize. Didn't even seem to notice he had touched her. His attention fixed on the throne, on the king who sat watching the festivities with eyes the color of molten gold. Wolf eyes even in human form. Alpha eyes that missed nothing. Arya watched Garrett weave through the crowd with the peculiar focus of the extremely drunk, trying to appear sober. He carried something, she realized. A chalice. Special vintage, probably some rare wine meant to honor the king's victory. Servants didn't pour for the throne directly. That honor went to the king's inner circle, the trusted few who could approach without triggering the instincts that made Daemon Blackwell one of the most dangerous creatures in the kingdom. She should have returned to the kitchens. Her tray was empty, and Rowena would be furious if she lingered when there was work to be done. But something made Arya pause at the edge of a stone pillar partially hidden in shadow. Something about the way Garrett moved. Too deliberate, too focused. The kind of focus that had nothing to do with wine and everything to do with purpose. The chalice in his hand caught the torchlight. Silver chased with gold, the king's personal set reserved for the finest wines and most important toasts. But as Garrett lifted it high, beginning his approach to the dais, Arya saw something that made her heart stop. Purple shimmer. Faint as oil on water, visible for only a fraction of a second as the liquid caught the light. A color that shouldn't exist in any wine, no matter how rare. A color only she could see. Poison. Arya didn't question the knowledge. She had learned years ago not to question the things she saw that others didn't. The purple shimmer had appeared 3 times in her life. Once in the tea that killed the stablemaster's wife. Once in the wine that nearly killed Lord Preston during his visit 2 winters past. Once in the water that killed a litter of puppies in the kennels. Every time Arya had seen the shimmer, too late to warn anyone, too terrified of revealing her strange ability to speak up. People who were different didn't survive in the Blood Moon Kingdom. People who had unexplainable gifts were called aberrations, mistakes, threats to the natural order. Arya had spent 14 years hiding everything that made her unusual, terrified that someone would notice and decide she was too dangerous to live. But this was the king. Garrett mounted the steps to the dais. The guards flanking the throne didn't stop him. Why would they? He wore the king's colors, the silver wolf emblazoned on his chest, marking him as the trusted security. Daemon didn't even look at him, his attention fixed on some conversation happening at one of the lower tables. Garrett extended the chalice, silver and gold, and poison gleaming in the torchlight. Arya's body moved before her mind caught up. The empty tray clattered against stone as she dropped it. Her bare feet slapped flagstones as she ran, weaving between bodies. Too shocked to react fast enough to stop her, someone shouted. She didn't hear the words. The world narrowed to a tunnel, to the steps of the dais, to the chalice rising toward the king's lips. She hit Garrett from the side with all 110 pounds of her weight. It wasn't enough to knock him down, not even close, but it was enough to jar his arm. The chalice flew from his grip, wand arcing through the air in a crimson spray that caught the firelight like blood. Droplets hit Arya's face, her dress, the pristine white fur cloak of the lady sitting closest to the throne. The chalice hit stone and shattered. The sound rang through sudden, absolute silence. 300 wolves stopped, breathing as one. The music died. Conversations cut off mid-word. Even the fire seemed to dim, as if the flames themselves sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere, from celebration to crisis. Arya stood frozen on the steps of the dais, her chest heaving, wine dripping from her fingers. Garrett stumbled back, his face a mask of shock rapidly transforming into fury. The king's guards had their hands on their weapon steel, singing as blades cleared leather. Every eye in the great hall locked on the barefoot servant girl who had just committed what could only be interpreted as an assault on the king's guard. She was going to die. The certainty settled into her bones like ice water. There was no explanation she could give that wouldn't sound insane. No way to describe the purple shimmer that only she could see. No proof that Garrett had meant harm, that the wine had been poisoned, that she had just saved the king's life. All they would see was a servant who had broken the most fundamental rule, who had drawn attention, who had disrupted the celebration and destroyed the king's property and touched one of his guards with violence. Garrett's hand moved to his belt, to the dagger every guard carried, his face twisted with rage, lips pulling back from teeth that were already shifting, already becoming canine. He was going to shift. Going to tear her throat out right here on the steps, and no one would stop him because she was nothing, nobody, a servant who had stepped so far out of line she didn't deserve to breathe. But before he could draw the blade, before he could complete the shift that would paint the dais with her blood, something else happened. Something Arya's mind struggled to process because it made no sense, violated every rule of pack hierarchy she had spent 14 years learning to navigate. A needle appeared in Garrett's hand, thin as a hair, silver bright, barely visible in the firelight. He lunged for her, murder in his eyes. The needle aimed for her throat. Arya tried to move. Her body wouldn't obey. Fear locked every muscle, froze her in place like a rabbit before the wolf. She watched the needle come closer, watched death approach in slow motion, and some distant part of her mind registered the purple shimmer coating the metal. The same poison. Backup plan. If the wine failed, the needle wouldn't. The silver pierced her palm. She had raised her hand instinctively, a useless attempt at defense. The needle sank deep into flesh, burning like liquid fire as the poison entered her bloodstream. Arya gasped more from shock than pain. Garrett yanked the needle back, his face a rictus of panic now instead of rage. He had meant to kill the king. Now he had poisoned a servant in front of 300 witnesses. The great hall erupted. Guards swarmed Garrett, slamming him face first into stone before he could run or explain or do anything except scream denials that no one believed. The nobles surged to their feet, some moving toward the exits, others pressing closer to see what fresh drama was unfolding. Arya heard shouting, heard her name, though she had no idea how anyone knew it, heard Rowena's voice shrieking about worthless serving girls and disrespect and execution. But all of that faded to background noise because the poison was moving fast. Silver and Belladonna, her strange gift, whispered a combination meant to paralyze the wolf, then stop the heart, meant for an alpha king strong enough to fight off most toxins, more than enough to kill a wolfless servant girl. Her legs buckled. The dais tilted sideways, or maybe she was falling. She couldn't tell anymore. Her vision blurred, the edges going dark and hazy. Sound became muffled, distant, like she was sinking underwater. Her hand burned, the pain spreading up her arm in waves of fire that made her want to scream, but her throat wouldn't work. She hit something. Not stone, something warm, solid, leather and skin and the scent of cedar wood and steel, impossibly close, impossibly real. Arms closed around her, not gently, with the crushing strength of a predator catching prey, hard enough to restrict breathing, possessive enough that her fading mind registered it as claiming rather than catching. She was lifted, the world spinning sickeningly before it steadied into a new orientation. She wasn't falling anymore. She was being held. Through the poison haze, through the darkness creeping into her vision, Arya felt herself moved, carried, placed on something hard and carved, something that smelled like old oak and power and the blood of every alpha king who had sat there before. The throne. She was on the throne. Impossible. Forbidden. The throne that only the alpha king could occupy, that touching meant death for anyone else, that represented power and dominance and everything she could never be. Weight settled beside her, against her. A hand the size of a dinner plate curved around her waist, fingers spanning her ribcage, thumb pressing just below her breast, where her heart hammered its final desperate rhythm. Another hand caught her chin, tilting her head back, forcing her to look up even though her eyes wouldn't focus. Gold. Molten gold staring down at her with an intensity that burned hotter than the poison. Wolf eyes, alpha eyes, the king's eyes. And then he spoke. His voice rolled through the sudden silence like thunder over the mountains, deep enough to resonate in her bones. Commanding enough that even dying, even terrified, her body responded with an instinct older than thought. You bled for a king who never spoke your name. Each word carved itself into the air, into the stone, into the collective consciousness of 300 wolves who would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. Now every tongue in this kingdom speaks yours. His head lowered, his breath ghosted across her face, warm and alive, and carrying the scent of leather and cedar, and something wild, something that made her dying wolf stir for the first time in 14 years. His lips brushed her ear, and he whispered words meant only for her, words that somehow she heard clearly, despite the poison stealing her awareness. The world bleeds for you now. Then the scent hit him. Arya saw it happen, saw the exact moment her smell registered in his brain. His entire body went rigid. His pupils dilated until the gold was just a thin ring around endless black. His nostrils flared as he dragged in a breath deep enough to make his chest expand against her side. His hand tightened on her waist claws, extending to prick through wool and into skin, not quite breaking through but threatening it. Rain on stone after wildfire. That was what her father had called it during one of the few conversations she remembered from before they killed him. Your mother smelled like morning dew on roses, he had said. You smell like the earth after it burns, like hope growing from ashes. Wild time for courage. She had never understood what he meant, had never been able to smell herself the way wolves scented each other. But watching Damon Blackwell breathe her in like a drowning man breaking the surface, watching his eyes go full wolf, watching his mouth part and his tongue touch his teeth as if tasting her scent on the air, she finally understood. This was what the romances talked about, what the old songs described, what every unmated wolf dreamed of and most never found. Recognition. The king made a sound low in his chest, not quite a growl, not quite a groan, something between pain and pleasure and discovery. His hand moved from her chin to her injured palm, the one still bleeding, still burning with poison. He lifted her hand to his face and Arya's fading mind struggled to process what he was doing. His tongue touched her skin, licked the wound in one long possessive stroke. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. The old stories were full of Alpha Kings tasting the blood of their enemies. But this was different. This was intimate. This was the kind of claiming that happened in private between mates, never in front of 300 witnesses. But Damon didn't seem to care about the audience. He sealed his mouth over the puncture wound and sucked. The poison her dying brain supplied. He was drawing out the poison. Alpha saliva carried healing properties, could neutralize most toxins, could save her if he got enough of it out fast enough. The burning in her palm began to ease. The darkness at the edges of her vision retreated slightly. Her heart, which had been stuttering its way to stopping, found a steadier rhythm. Not healed, not safe, but not dying quite as quickly. Damon lifted his head. His lips were stained with her blood in the purple shimmer of poison. He turned his head and spat the mixture, splattering on the dais stones where it hissed and smoked. Silver and belladonna, enough to kill, enough that he had just poisoned himself to save her. But alphas were stronger. Their systems could handle toxins that would drop a lesser wolf in seconds. He would survive the amount he had ingested. The question was whether she would survive what remained in her blood. Guards, his voice cracked like a whip, seize Garrett. If he's not in the dungeons within 60 seconds, I start taking heads. The guards moved fast enough to blur. Garrett, who had been struggling weakly under the weight of 4 armored wolves, disappeared from Arya's limited field of vision. She heard him screaming, denying begging. Heard the heavy doors of the great hall boom open and then slam shut. Heard the blessed silence that followed. The rest of you. Damon's attention swung to the crowd. 300 nobles and warriors collectively flinched. Out, the feast is over. No one argued, no one questioned. They moved as one, a wave of fur and leather and silk flowing toward the exits with the desperate urgency of prey fleeing a predator. Arya heard chairs scraping, heard the rustle of fabric, heard frightened whispers. But within moments, the great hall stood empty except for the two of them, the king and the dying servant on his throne. Damon looked down at her. In the firelight, his scars stood out in sharp relief, the damaged tissue catching shadows. His hair fell forward, curtaining them in relative privacy. Up close like this, Arya could see details she had never noticed from across the room. The exact shade of his eyes, which weren't just gold, but had flecks of amber and bronze. The silver threading through his temples, premature aging from years of war and stress. The way his jaw worked as he ground his teeth, as if fighting for control of something vast and violent inside him. What's your name? The question came out rough, almost angry. Arya tried to answer. Her throat wouldn't cooperate. The poison had stolen her voice along with her strength. She managed a whisper, barely audible. Arya. Arya. He repeated it like he was tasting the syllables, testing them against her scent. Arya what? Thorn. The second word came easier. Maybe because the poison was losing its grip. Maybe because his hand on her waist had started doing something strange, something that made warmth spread through her chest, pushing back the cold. Arya Thorn. He said it like a declaration, like a claiming. How did you know? She didn't pretend not to understand. The wine, it had a shimmer, purple, like oil. I see it on poisons. Always have. His eyes narrowed. You have a gift. Not a question, a statement. Arya waited for the fear to come, for the instinct to deny to protect herself. But with poison in her veins and the king's hand on her body and death still hovering close, lying seemed pointless. Yes. Can you walk? No. Can you stay conscious? I don't know. He made that sound again, the one between pain and pleasure. Then he moved, standing with her still in his arms, cradled against his chest like she weighed nothing. The great hall spun around her. She closed her eyes against the vertigo, her face pressing into the leather of his tunic. Cedar and steel and something else. Something that made her dying wolf whimper and press closer to the surface than it had been in 14 years. Where are you taking me? She shouldn't ask. Servants didn't question. But the poison made her reckless, made her forget the rules that kept her alive. My chambers. He started walking, each step measured, controlled, like he was fighting not to run. The healers will meet us there, Tun. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. I'm nobody. Just let me die in the servants' quarters. It's what's supposed to happen. He stopped walking. The sudden stillness was more frightening than movement. Arya forced her eyes open, forced herself to look up at his face. Bad idea, terrible idea, because what she saw there made her chest tight for reasons that had nothing to do with poison. Rage, absolute incandescent fury, not at her, at her words, at the world that made her believe dying alone was supposed to happen. You saved my life. Each word came out clipped, precise, the kind of control that preceded violence. You took poison meant for me. You moved without thinking, without calculating bushel, without asking what you'd gain. Do you understand how rare that is? How precious Arya didn't understand. Couldn't process precious and servant in the same context. But before she could say so, he started walking again faster now, his boots echoing in the empty hall. I've ruled this kingdom for 13 years. He spoke like he was explaining something to himself as much as to her. Survived 47 assassination attempts, fought in 63 battles, killed 217 enemies with my own hands. In all that time, in all those years of being surrounded by warriors and nobles and wolves who swear loyalty, you are the first person who ever moved to protect me without being ordered to. They reached a spiral staircase carved into the mountain itself. He took the steps two at a time, climbing toward the royal wing with the effortless strength of a predator in his prime. Arya's head lolled against his shoulder, the poison making it impossible to hold herself upright. You're the first person who ever bled for me without expecting payment. The staircase opened into a corridor she had never seen before. Servants weren't allowed in the royal wing. She glimpsed tapestries, polished armor, on Stan's doors of carved oak banded with iron. Everything spoke of wealth and power, and the kind of privilege she couldn't even imagine. Damon kicked open a door. The hinges screamed in protest. He carried her into a chamber so large it could have fit the entire servants' quarters inside it 3 times over. A massive hearth dominated one wall, flames already burning, casting dancing shadows across stone and wood. Furs covered the floor. Weapons lined the walls. A bed the size of a small house sat on a raised platform draped in dark fabrics that probably cost more than Arya's life. He laid her on that bed, on sheets softer than anything she had ever touched. The mattress gave beneath her weight, cradling her body like a cloud. She almost cried at the simple comfort of it. 14 years sleeping on stone and straw, and now this. Now dying in luxury instead of squalor. Don't close your eyes. Damon loomed over her, one hand braced on either side of her head. Stay with me, Arya Thorne. Tired. The words slurred. Her tongue felt too thick. Hurts. I know. His hand moved to her injured palm, the one he had already licked, already tried to heal. But you don't get to leave yet. You don't get to save the king and then die without seeing what happens next. What happens next? She should be terrified, should be worried about consequences, about breaking every rule, about being in the king's bed when she had no right. But the poison made fear distant, made everything distant, except his golden eyes and his cedar scent and the impossible gentleness in hands that could crush stone. You let me save you the way you saved me. He lifted her hand to his mouth again. But this time he didn't lick the wound. He bit his own wrist, tearing through skin and vein with canines that extended in a flash of transformation. Blood welled dark and rich. He pressed the wound to her lips. Drink. Alpha blood. The story said it could heal anything, could turn the dying back from death's door, could do things that modern healers with all their herbs and knowledge couldn't match. But it came with a price. Drinking an Alpha's blood created a bond. Temporary, weak compared to a true mate bond, but present, real, binding. Arya tried to turn her head away. I can't. The bond. You don't want to be bonded to a servant. I want you alive. He pressed his bleeding wrist harder against her mouth. Everything else is secondary. Drink, Arya. That's not a request. The blood hit her tongue, copper and heat and power that exploded through her system like lightning. She swallowed reflexively once, twice, 3 times before he pulled away. The wound on his wrist sealed, immediately healing with the supernatural speed that came with being Alpha strong. The poison screamed as it died. Arya felt it burning out of her system, consumed by something infinitely more powerful. Her heart stopped stuttering. Her vision cleared. The burning in her palm faded to a dull ache. She dragged in a breath deep enough to make her ribs expand, and it didn't hurt. She was going to live. The relief lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then reality crashed back. She was in the king's bed. She had drunk his blood. She had created a bond, however temporary, with the Alpha King of the Blood Moon. She was still wearing her servant's dress, still barefoot, still nobody with no right to be breathing the same air. I should go. She tried to sit up. Her body had other ideas. The healing had taken everything she had left. The servants' quarters. Rowena will be looking for me. I have duties. Damon's hand pressed her back down, gentle but absolutely immovable. You're not going anywhere. But the bond. People will know. They'll say things. You can't be bonded to a servant. The council will object. The nobles will talk. Your reputation can burn for all I care. He cut through her rising panic with the same tone he probably used to command armies. You saved my life, Arya. That creates a blood debt older than any council, stronger than any reputation. The law is clear. You are under my protection now. For how long? Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, weaker. 30 days. He moved away from the bed, but not far. Just to a small table where he poured water from a pitcher into a cup. Blood price statute, ancient law. Anyone who saves the Alpha's life receives protection for 30 days while the debt is evaluated. He brought the water back as slipping one hand behind her head to lift her enough to drink. The kindness of the gesture made her chest ache worse than the poison had. She sipped the cool liquid, washing away the copper taste of his blood. And after 30 days, she shouldn't ask, shouldn't care. But she did. His expression shifted. Something passed through his golden eyes that she couldn't read. Something that made him look almost vulnerable, which was impossible because the scarred wolf, the Iron King, didn't do vulnerability. After 30 days, we see if the debt becomes something else. He set the cup aside. His hand moved to her face, calloused fingers, peaceably gentle, as they traced her cheekbone. But first you heal. You rest. You let me find out who sent Garrett and why. You let me keep you safe the way you kept me safe. I don't understand. Arya's eyes burned with tears she couldn't explain. I'm nobody. I'm wolfless. I'm a servant who sleeps on the kitchen floor. Why do you care? His thumb caught a tear before it could fall. He studied the moisture on his skin like it was something precious, rare. When he looked back at her, his whole face had changed, softer, open in a way she suspected he almost never allowed. Because in 13 years of ruling, of being surrounded by wolves who bow and scrape and promise loyalty, you're the only one who ever moved without thinking about what it would cost you. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You're the only one who saw me in danger, and your first instinct was to save me, not to calculate how my death might benefit you. He leaned closer, close enough that she could count his scars. Close enough that his breath ghosted across her face. Close enough that when he spoke again, she felt the words as much as heard them. You're the only one in this entire kingdom who looked at me and saw something worth dying for. The tears fell then. She couldn't stop them. 14 years of being nothing, of being invisible, of being told she was defective and worthless and less than the dirt on the floor. 14 years of holding everything inside because showing emotion meant showing weakness, and showing weakness meant pain. It all broke at once, and she cried, and the Alpha King of the Blood Moon held her face in hands that could kill but chose to comfort instead. Sleep. He pressed his forehead to hers. The gesture felt sacred, ancient. The healers will be here soon. They'll make sure the poison is truly gone. But for now, just sleep. You're safe, Arya Thorne. I swear it on my throne, on my crown, on the blood we just shared. You're safe. Her eyes drifted closed. She tried to fight it, tried to stay alert, but exhaustion pulled her down like a riptide. The last thing she felt was his hand in her hair, smoothing back the tangled mess with a gentleness that broke her heart. The last thing she heard was his voice speaking words she was too far gone to fully process, but that carved themselves into her soul anyway. Mine to protect, mine to defend. Mine. Darkness took her. But for the first time in 14 years, it was the gentle darkness of true rest, not the cold darkness of fear. For the first time in 14 years, she felt safe. And somewhere deep in her chest, buried beneath 14 years of nightshade, poison, and abuse, and learned helplessness, her wolf opened one golden eye and whispered a single word that would change everything. Mate. Arya woke to sunlight. Real sunlight, not the gray pre-dawn gloom that usually dragged her from sleep. Golden light poured through windows she didn't recognize. Tall, arched openings cut into stone so thick it had probably stood for centuries. Dust motes danced in the beams like tiny stars, and for a moment she just watched them, her mind empty of everything except the simple beauty of light moving through air. Then memory crashed back. The feast, the poison, the king. His blood in her mouth, his hands on her face, his voice calling her mine. She bolted upright and immediately regretted it. Her body protested, muscles stiff and aching like she had been beaten. Her left hand throbbed where the needle had pierced her palm. She looked down and found it bandaged in clean white linen, the wrapping so expert it could only have been done by a healer. Someone had changed her clothes too. The rough wool servant's dress was gone, replaced by a nightgown of soft cotton that felt like clouds against skin used to burlap and calluses. The room around her was the same impossible luxury from last night. The bed, the furs, the hearth where embers still glowed red, keeping the mountain cold at bay. She was still in the king's chambers, still in a place she had no right to be. Panic clawed up her throat. How long had she slept? What time was it? Rowena would be furious, would have her whipped for missing duties, would make her pay for disappearing in the middle of the feast. 14 years of conditioning screamed at her to move, to run, to get back to the kitchens before the punishment became something she couldn't survive. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her bare feet touched fur so soft it made her gasp. She stood on shaking legs, her body protesting every movement. The room spun for a second before steadying. Alive. She was alive. The poison should have killed her, but the king's blood had burned it from her system, leaving her weak but breathing. The king. Where was he? She scanned the chamber, her heart hammering. Empty. No sign of Damon Blackwell's massive frame, no sound of breathing beyond her own. Relief and disappointment warred in her chest. Relief because she didn't know what to say to him, how to act, what the rules were for a servant who had drunken Alpha's blood and slept in his bed. Disappointment because some treacherous part of her had wanted to see him again, wanted to know if last night was real or some poison-induced hallucination. A sound from beyond an interior door made her freeze. Water running, splashing. Then a voice deep and rough with sleep, muttering something she couldn't make out. He was here, just in another room, bathing probably in whatever luxury Alphas used to wash away the night. She needed to leave. Now, before he came back and found her standing here like an idiot, before she had to face him in daylight without poison to blur the impossibility of what had happened between them. Arya looked around for her dress, found it folded on a chair by the hearth, cleaned and mended, the wine stains gone like they had never existed. Someone had even repaired the hem where it had been coming apart. She grabbed it, started to strip off the nightgown, then stopped. Voices in the corridor outside. Multiple people coming closer. She recognized one of them. Rowena. The kitchen mistress's sharp tones cut through oak like a blade through flesh. Absolutely unacceptable. The girl has duties. I don't care if she saved the king's life, she still has floors to scrub and meals to prepare. This special treatment will give her ideas above her station. Another voicemail, older. Elder Moira's assistant, maybe. The blood price statute is ancient law, Rowena. You cannot simply ignore, ancient law or not, she's a servant. His Majesty has obligations to the kingdom that don't include coddling wolfless omegas who got lucky. The door swung open without warning. Rowena swept in like a storm, her broad face flushed with anger, her gray-streaked hair pulled back so tight it made her eyes narrow. Behind her came three people Arya recognized from council meetings she had served. Elder Moira herself, ancient and severe in her formal robes. Steward Corvin, tall and thin, with cold hazel eyes that never seemed to blink. And Isolde Corvin's daughter, beautiful and cruel in equal measure, her auburn hair catching the sunlight like fresh blood. All of them stopped dead when they saw Arya standing by the bed in nothing but a nightgown, clearly having just woken, clearly having spent the night in the king's private chambers. Rowena's face went from flush to purple. You, how dare you still be here? Get dressed this instant and return to your duties. The kitchens have been in chaos without... She stays. The voice came from the interior door. Damon stepped into the chamber and Arya's breath caught in her throat despite herself. He wore only dark trousers, his chest bare, water still beading on skin that was more scar tissue than smooth flesh. His hair dripped, leaving wet trails across shoulders so broad they blocked most of the doorway. He looked like violence barely contained in human form. He looked like every dark fantasy and forbidden dream Arya had never let herself acknowledge. He looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Your Majesty. Rowena recovered first, dropping into a curtsy that looked more like an insult than respect. Forgive the intrusion, but the servants' schedules cannot be disrupted. This girl has responsibilities. Had responsibilities. Damon crossed to a wardrobe, pulled out a shirt, and shrugged into it without taking his eyes off Arya. As of last night, Arya Thorne is under royal protection. Blood price statute, which means she answers to no one but me for the next 30 days. But your majesty, Corvin stepped forward, his voice smooth as oil. Surely you see the impropriety. The girl is a servant. Wolfless? There are protocols for life debts that don't require this level of disruption. Are you questioning my interpretation of pack law, Corvin? Damon's tone stayed level, polite even, but something dangerous moved beneath the words. Something that made the steward pale and step back. Of course not, my king. I simply suggest that there are more suitable arrangements. A monetary reward, perhaps, a position in the lower village, something that doesn't require her presence in the royal wing. I'll consider your suggestion. Damon finished buttoning his shirt. Right after you explain why one of my personal guards tried to poison me last night. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Isolde's eyes widened. Corvin's face went carefully blank. Rowena looked confused, but Elder Moira nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. Garrett has been questioned through the night, Moira said, her voice carrying the weight of her 70 years. He claims he was approached 3 weeks ago by an intermediary from the southern wastes, offered gold and safe passage to kill you and make it look like an accident. He says he acted alone. Do you believe him? Damon asked. No. Moira's gaze swept the room, landing on each person in turn. A border guard transferred in only a month ago would not have access to belladonna refined enough to fool royal tasters. Someone with connections with resources helped him. Then we have a traitor in the castle. Damon's voice stayed calm, too calm, the kind of calm that preceded executions. Someone who wants me dead badly enough to work with our enemies. Someone who knew the feast schedule, the guard rotations, the wine service. Silence fell like a hammer. Arya pressed back against the bedpost, trying to make herself invisible. This was politics. Power plays. Things servants didn't witness, didn't hear, didn't survive, knowing about. But she was trapped here, still in the nightgown, still bandaged and weak with nowhere to hide. We will find them, your majesty, Corvin said. I have my best people investigating. In the meantime, perhaps it would be wise to avoid any unnecessary changes to castle routine. Disruptions could alert the traitor that we're looking. Disruptions like publicly claiming a servant as protected. Damon's smile was all teeth. Like moving her into the royal wing, where she'll be surrounded by my personal guard, like making it very clear that anyone who harms her will answer to me directly. Precisely. Corvin missed the trap completely. Such actions would draw attention, create gossip, make the girl a target. Good. Damon moved to stand beside Arya. She hadn't heard him cross the room, but suddenly he was there, solid and warm and smelling like cedar and clean water. Let them target her. Let them try on. Because I promise you, steward, anyone who comes for Arya Thorne will learn exactly why they call me the Scarred Wolf. His hand found the small of her back. The touch sent electricity up her spine, made her wolf stir and press against the surface of her consciousness with an urgency that terrified her. 14 years of silence, and now the wolf wanted out, wanted to claim this touch, this protection, this impossible thing building between them. But your majesty, the girl is nobody. Isolde spoke for the first time, her beautiful face twisted with something ugly. Jealousy, Arya realized with shock. The beta's daughter was jealous of a kitchen servant. The girl has a name. Damon's tone could have frozen water. Use it. Isolde flushed red. Arya then, she's wolfless. Omega. She has no standing in the pack, no bloodline, no value beyond her labor. Making her your protected one doesn't change what she is. What she is, Damon said softly, dangerously, is the person who saved my life. What she is someone who moved faster than my best warriors. What she is brave enough to take poison meant for me without hesitation. Can you claim the same as Isolde? If you saw that chalice coming toward me, would you have thrown yourself between me and death? Isolde's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The answer was written all over her face. No, she wouldn't have. None of them would have. I thought not. Damon's hand pressed more firmly against Arya's back. A claiming gesture, one that made her breath catch. The council is dismissed. I'll deal with the traitor investigation personally. And Rowena sends someone to collect Arya's belongings from the servants' quarters. She won't be returning there. Where will she stay? Rowena's voice came out strangled. Here, in the royal wing. There's a chamber adjacent to mine one my mother used before she passed. Arya will take it. The protests erupted simultaneously. Improper, unprecedented, against tradition. The council voices rose in a cacophony of objection that made Arya's head spin. But through it all, Daemon stood silent and unmoved, his hand steady on her back. His presence an unshakable wall between her and the people who wanted her gone. Finally, Elder Moira raised a hand. The arguing stopped. Your Majesty, while the blood price statute does grant you the right to protect her housing, her and the royal wing sends a very specific message to the pack. Are you prepared for the implications? What implications? Damon's tone suggested he knew exactly what she meant and didn't care. That you're considering her as a potential mate. Moira spoke the words carefully, watching his reaction. That you're claiming her as yours in truth, not just in protection. The room held its breath. Arya's heart stopped. Mate, the word her wolf had whispered last night. The impossible, insane, absolutely forbidden thing that couldn't happen because she was nobody, and he was everything, and the gap between them was wider than the mountains themselves. Daemon looked down at her. His golden eyes caught the sunlight turning molten. And if I am, the world tilted. Arya grabbed the bedpost to keep from falling. He couldn't have said that. Couldn't have implied what she thought he was implying. Couldn't be looking at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. Then you'll need to prove the bond is real, Moira said. Ancient law allows for cross-class mating, but only if the bond is genuine, only if both parties accept it willingly, and only if the weaker party proves they can survive in the stronger one's world. She already proved she can survive. Damon's voice held an edge, now impatience breaking through his control. She survived 14 years in the kitchens. She survived poison that would have killed a wolf twice her size. She survived seeing something wrong and acting on it when staying silent would have been safer. What more proof do you need? The pack needs to see her as worthy, Corvin said. Needs to accept her as more than a servant who got lucky. You said it yourself, Your Majesty. We have traitors in the castle. Making an enemy of the entire council by forcing an unsuitable mate on us would only create more threats to your life. I don't recall asking for your approval. Damon's control was fraying. Arya could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his jaw worked, the gold bleeding into his eyes. The blood price statute is clear. She's under my protection. Where she lives, how I treat her, what I choose to do about the bond growing between us, that's my business. There's no bond. Isolde's voice dripped venom. She's wolfless. She can't feel a mate bond. Whatever you think you're sensing is grief or gratitude or the blood you shared. Nothing more. Something inside Arya cracked. 14 years of being told she was broken. 14 years of believing it. 14 years of watching other wolves shift and run and connect while she stayed trapped in a useless human body. The words shouldn't have hurt. She had heard worse 1,000 times. But coming from Isolde's perfect mouth in front of the king who had called her mine, they cut deeper than any silver blade. You're right. The words left Arya's mouth before she could stop them. Everyone turned to stare. She forced herself to stand straighter to meet Isolde's cruel gaze. I'm wolfless. I can't shift. I can't feel what other wolves feel. I have no bond to offer anyone, much less an Alpha King. Damon's hand tightened on her back claws, pricking through the thin nightgown, warning her to stop, but she couldn't, not now. Not with all of them looking at her like she was trash that needed to be swept away. But I know gratitude, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I know what it means when someone shows kindness to a person who has never received it. I know what it feels like to be seen after years of being invisible. So yes, maybe there's no bond. Maybe His Majesty is acting out of grief or obligation or misplaced honor. But that doesn't change the fact that I saved his life. Doesn't change the fact that the blood price statute exists for a reason. She turned to face Daemon, forcing herself to look up at him, even though the intensity in his eyes made her want to look away. You don't owe me anything beyond the 30 days, Your Majesty. I don't expect a chamber or protection beyond what the law requires or anything that would make the council hate you. Use me to draw out the traitor if you want. Let me be bait. Let me be useful. But please don't fight with your council over someone like me. I'm not worth it. The last words came out broken, because they were true, because she believed them down to her bones, because 14 years of being told she was worthless had carved the certainty into her soul. Daemon moved so fast she didn't see it coming. One moment he was beside her. The next he had her face in both hands, forcing her to hold his gaze, his grip gentle but absolutely unbreakable. Don't. The single word carried more command than a shouted order. Don't ever say that again. But it's true. It's a lie. His thumb stroked her cheekbones, a gesture so tender it made her eyes burn. A lie they've told you so many times you believed it. But I see the truth, Arya. I see a woman who moved without fear when everyone else froze. I see someone who chose my life over her own safety. I see courage and compassion in a heart so pure it cuts me to look at it. Your Majesty, Corvin tried to interrupt. Out! Damon didn't look away from Arya. All of you, now! But the investigation out. The word detonated like thunder, alpha command impossible to resist. Even Elder Moira bowed her head and retreated. The others followed Rowena, muttering, Corvin calculating Isolde, shooting Arya a look of pure hatred as she swept from the room. The door slammed behind them. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Arya's ragged breathing. Damon still held her face, still looked at her like she was something rare and precious. I need you to understand something, he said quietly. I've ruled this kingdom for 13 years. I've made decisions that cost lives, that broke alliances, that changed the future of the pack. I've never once doubted my choices. But if I let you walk out of this room believing you're worthless, I would regret it until the day I die. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Why do you care so much? His expression shifted. The hard edges of the king softened into something more human, more vulnerable. 4 winters ago, you dropped a tray of dishes in the Great Hall. The crash made half the guards draw their weapons. Rowena screamed at you, beat you right there in front of everyone for being clumsy. Do you remember? Arya remembered. The shame had burned worse than the blows. She nodded. I was sitting on the throne watching. I remember thinking I should stop it, should order Rowena to stand down. But I didn't, because you were a servant, and servants were invisible, and it wasn't my place to interfere with kitchen discipline. His voice roughened with something that sounded like shame. But after Rowena left, I watched you clean up the mess, watched you pick up every single shard of broken pottery with hands that were shaking and bruised. You didn't cry, didn't complain, just did the work. He paused, his thumbs still moving in small circles against her skin. And I watched you share your dinner with the stable boy that night. Your portion was already half of what it should have been as punishment. But you gave half of what you had to a boy even lower in the hierarchy than you. I watched you comfort him when he cried. Watched you tell him stories to make him smile. Arya's throat closed. She didn't remember him watching, had never known anyone saw those moments. I've watched you for 4 years, Arya Thorne. Watched you show kindness to people who had none for you. Watched you work until you could barely stand. Watched you endure things that would have broken weaker wolves. And I've asked myself 1,000 times why I couldn't stop thinking about a wolfless servant who should have meant nothing to me. His forehead pressed against hers, the gesture sacred and intimate, and nothing like a king should treat a servant. Last night when your scent hit me, I finally understood. You're not broken. You're not worthless. You're my mate. And I've been waiting for you for 13 years without even knowing it. The words hung in the air between them. Impossible words. Insane words. Words that couldn't be true because the universe didn't work that way, didn't give broken girls and alpha kings happy endings. I can't be your mate, Arya forced the words out. I don't have a wolf. I can't feel the bond. I can't give you what a true mate should give. Then we'll make our own bond. His hands slid from her face to her shoulders, grounding her. One that doesn't require wolves or scent, or any of the things the pack says are necessary. One built on the fact that you saw me in danger, and your first instinct was to save me. On the fact that I've watched you for 4 years and never stopped wanting to know what it would feel like to make you smile. The council will never accept it. The council doesn't have to live my life. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I do. And I'm choosing this. Choosing you. If you'll have me. Arya's mind spun. This couldn't be happening. Couldn't be real. But his hands on her shoulders felt real. His scent in her lungs felt real. The warmth building in her chest, the way her wolf pressed against the surface of her consciousness, like it was trying to break free after 14 years of silence. All of it felt desperately, dangerously real. I don't know how to be anything but a servant, she whispered. I don't know how to live in your world. Don't know how to talk to nobles or wear fine clothes, or any of the things a protected one should know. Then I'll teach you. His smile was small but genuine, transforming his scarred face into something almost beautiful. We have 30 days. Let me use them to show you that you're more than what they told you, more than what you believe. Let me prove that you're worth fighting the entire pack for. Her wolf howled inside her chest. Yes, mine, mate. The words ancient and certain and so loud Arya wondered if he could hear them. But she was human, wolfless. Those instincts shouldn't exist in her, shouldn't be possible, shouldn't be screaming at her to accept this impossible offer. What if you're wrong? She needed to ask, needed to hear his answer. What if I can't be what you need? What if the bond you think you feel is just gratitude or the blood we shared? Then we find out together. He reached up and pulled something from around his neck, a key iron and old hanging on a leather cord. He pressed it into her bandaged palm, wrapping her fingers around the metal. This opens my private study, my personal chambers, every door in the royal wing. I gave it to you last night, but you probably don't remember. She didn't. The memory was hazy, blurred by poison. I'm giving it to you again now, he continued, with a clear head and witnesses gone. This key means you have access to everything I guard, my space, my secrets, my life. It means I trust you, Arya, completely. The key felt heavy, too heavy, weighted with responsibility she didn't know how to carry. What if I lose it? What if someone steals it and uses it against you? Then I'll get new locks. He said it like it was simple, like the security of the kingdom was less important than her peace of mind. But you won't lose it, because I'm betting on that courage I saw last night, that quick thinking, that pure heart that moved to protect a king without counting the cost. Arya looked down at the key in her palm, iron and old and marked with the blood moon crest, a symbol of trust she had never earned, of faith she didn't deserve, but also a choice. He was giving her a choice. 30 days to try. 30 days to see if a wolfless servant could survive in an alpha's world. 30 days to find out if the bond he claimed existed was real, or if it was all a beautiful lie that would shatter when reality set in. She closed her fingers around the key. The metal warmed against her skin. 30 days. 30 days, he agreed. And Arya? One more thing. She looked up, found him smiling that small, devastating smile that made him look almost human. You're not sleeping in the servants' quarters ever again. That chamber next to mine, it was my mother's. She would have loved you, would have seen in you what I see, and she would have wanted you to have it. The tears came then, silent, unstoppable, because nobody had ever given her anything without expecting payment. Nobody had ever looked at her and seen potential instead of a mistake. Nobody had ever called her worth fighting for. Damon pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapped around her, careful of her injured hand, mindful of her weakness. She felt his heartbeat against her cheek, steady and strong, felt his hand in her hair, smoothing back the tangles, felt safe in a way she had never felt safe before. Thank you, she whispered into his shirt. For what? For seeing me. His arms tightened. Thank you for saving me. They stood like that while the sun climbed higher outside the windows, while the castle below went about its business, unaware that something fundamental had shifted in the royal wing. While Arya's wolf pressed against her consciousness in whispered words she was finally ready to believe. Mine. Mate. Ours. For the first time in 14 years, Arya let herself hope. The chamber that had belonged to Damon's mother made Arya's chest constrict with longing she couldn't name. Sunlight poured through tall windows overlooking the eastern mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The bed was smaller than the king's, but still enormous by servant standards, draped in soft blues and silvers that reminded her of winter twilight. Tapestries covered the stone walls, depicting wolves running through forests under full moons, their forms woven with such skill they seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. But it was the small things that broke her. The carved wooden box on the dressing table, still holding hairpins shaped like tiny flowers. The book of poetry left open on the windowsill, its pages yellowed with age. The fur-lined slippers by the hearth worn at the heels from years of use. Evidence of a life lived, of a woman who had existed in this space and left her mark on it. She died when I was 19, Damon said from the doorway. He hadn't left her side since the council departed, had personally supervised the servants who brought her meager belongings from the kitchens. One spare dress, a wooden comb missing half its teeth, a smooth river stone her father had given her before he died. Everything she owned fit in a cloth sack smaller than the pillows on this bed. Fever took her in 3 days. I wasn't here. I was at the border fighting. Arya turned to look at him. He stood with one shoulder against the doorframe, his expression distant, lost in memory. I got back too late to say goodbye, he continued. Spent a year after that sleeping in her chambers, trying to feel close to her again. Eventually I had to stop. Had to lock the door and leave everything the way she left it, because changing anything felt like erasing her. I shouldn't be here then. Arya took a step toward the door. This is sacred. I'm intruding on something that's yours and hers, and she would have wanted you here. Damon moved into the room, his presence making the large space feel suddenly smaller. My mother believed in signs, in fate, in the old magic that runs under the mountains. She would have said you appearing in my life the way you did, saving me the way you did, was the moon's will. He crossed to the window, looking out at the peaks that stretched endlessly into the distance. 3 days before she died, she made me promise something, made me swear on my father's grave that I wouldn't mate for duty or politics, that I would wait until I found someone who saw me as Daemon, not as the king. Arya's throat tightened. And have you found that person? He turned to face her, and the answer was written in every line of his scarred face. 4 years ago, I started seeing her, really seeing her, watching her show kindness to people who had none for her, watching her survive things that should have broken her, wondering what she would say if I ever found the courage to speak to her. Why didn't you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. If you noticed me that long ago, why wait until last night? Because you were terrified. His voice roughened. Every time I came into a room you were in, you went pale, started shaking. I could smell your fear from across the hall. I thought it was me specifically, that my scars or my reputation or something about me personally frightened you. He ran a hand through his still damp hair, frustration clear in the gesture. It took me 3 years to realize you reacted that way to all authority. That the fear wasn't personal, it was learned. And by then I didn't know how to approach you without making it worse. Didn't know how to cross the gap between king and servant without abusing the power I held over you. Arya understood. The fear had been real, bone deep, carved into her by years of pain whenever she drew attention from anyone in power. Even now, standing in this beautiful chamber with a man who claimed she was his mate, part of her waited for the trap to spring, for the kindness to curdle into cruelty. I'm still afraid, she admitted. Not of you specifically, but of this, of being somewhere I don't belong, of forgetting the rules and doing something wrong and having it all taken away. Damon crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. His hands found her shoulders warm and solid and grounding. Then we make new rules, rules that don't involve you being afraid in your own space. Like what? Like you don't have to ask permission to eat, or sleep, or use anything in this chamber. This is yours now, Arya, truly yours. Not on loan, not conditional. Yours. The concept felt foreign, impossible. She had never owned anything beyond the clothes on her back and the few items in her sack. Everything else belonged to someone else, was used at their pleasure, and taken away at their whim. What about the council? She forced herself to ask the practical question. They hate this, hate me being here. Won't they make trouble? Let them try. Damon's expression hardened. The blood price statute is older than the council itself. They can object all they want, but they can't override ancient law without a full pack vote, which requires 70% approval. They'll never get those numbers. But Corvin said I need to prove myself worthy. Corvin is a snake who's been angling for more power since before I took the throne. Damon's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. He's not wrong that the pack will need to see you as more than a servant. But that's not about worth, Arya. That's about perception. And perception can be changed. How? A knock at the door interrupted whatever answer he might have given. Damon called permission to enter, and 3 women swept into the chamber carrying armfuls of fabric in every color imaginable. Servants, Arya realized, but not kitchen staff. These were ladies' maids, the kind who attended to nobles, their own dresses fine enough to make her old servant's wool look like burlap. Your Majesty, the eldest curtsied smoothly. You sent for us? I did. Damon stepped back from Arya, though his hand lingered at the small of her back. This is Arya Thorne. She'll be residing in the royal wing under my protection. She needs appropriate clothing, shoes, everything required for someone of her new station. The 3 women's eyes went wide. They looked Arya up and down, taking in the borrowed nightgown, the bandaged hand, the tangled silver gold hair that hadn't seen a proper brush in years. Arya waited for the judgment, the sneers, the condescension she had learned to expect from servants who ranked higher than kitchen maids. Instead, the eldest smiled, warm and genuine. Of course, Your Majesty. We'll take excellent care of her. See that you do. Damon's tone held warning. And remember, anything she needs, any request she makes, you treat it as if it came from me directly. Understood. Perfectly, Your Majesty. He turned back to Arya. I have to meet with my commanders about the investigation. Garrett hasn't given us anything useful yet. but I want to review the guard schedules myself. Will you be all right here? No, she wanted to say no, wanted to beg him not to leave her alone with these women who would surely see through her the moment he left. But that was the fear talking the learned helplessness that expected cruelty as the default. So instead, she nodded. Good. He lifted her bandaged hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles that made heat flood her cheeks. I'll be back in 2 hours. If you need anything before then, send one of the maids to find me. Then he was gone, and Arya was alone with three strangers who held her future in their hands. The eldest stepped forward first. She was perhaps 50 with kind brown eyes and gray threading her dark hair. I'm Margaret. This is Claire and Beth. We've served the royal family for 20 years. We took care of the late queen before she passed. Arya's voice came out smaller than she wanted. I don't know how to do this. I've never had anyone help me dress. Never worn anything that needed more than pulling over my head. I don't want to waste your time or... Hush. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. You're not wasting anything. Now let's get you out of that nightgown and into a proper bath. When was the last time you had hot water? I don't remember. The admission stung. Servants bathed in the cold creek behind the kitchens when they had time, which was almost never. Margaret's expression softened with something that looked like pity, but not the cruel kind, the kind that came from genuine compassion. Then we start there. The next hour passed in a blur of sensations Arya had never experienced. Hot water, actually hot, steaming with herbs that made the air smell like summer gardens. Margaret and Claire helped her into the copper tub with a gentleness that made her want to cry, careful of her bandaged hand, respectful of her modesty. They washed her hair with soap that smelled like honey and roses working out tangles with infinite patience. Beth brought food, not scraps or leftovers, but fresh bread with butter cheese that didn't have mold on it, fruit so ripe it burst with juice on her tongue. Arya ate slowly, half convinced it would be snatched away, but the maids just smiled and encouraged her to take more. You're too thin, Margaret said, not unkindly. We'll fix that. Claire, make a note to have cook prepare the strengthening broth the late queen used to favor. I shouldn't take special food, Arya protested. The kitchens are busy enough without... The kitchens will do as they're told, Margaret interrupted. You're under the king's protection now. That means you eat properly, dress properly, and are treated with the respect your position deserves. But I don't have a position. I'm just... You're the woman who saved the king's life. Beth spoke up for the first time, her young voice fierce. My brother is one of the guards who was there last night. He said you moved faster than anyone, didn't even think about the danger. Said the king looked at you like you hung the moon. Heat crept up Arya's neck. That's not, I just reacted. Anyone would have. No one else did, Margaret said quietly. That's the point, dear. 300 wolves in that hall, and you were the only one brave enough to act. The only one who saw the danger and moved to stop it. That makes you remarkable whether you believe it or not. They helped her from the bath, wrapped her in towels so soft they felt like clouds, then sat her by the fire to dry her hair. Margaret worked a comb through the tangles with a patience Arya had never known, humming something low and soothing. Claire laid out dresses on the bed, each one more beautiful than anything Arya had ever imagined wearing. We'll need to take measurements for proper fittings, Claire said, eyeing Arya with a seamstress's critical gaze. But these should work for now. The blue, I think. It'll bring out her eyes. The dress was soft wool, dyed a deep sapphire blue, with long sleeves and a neckline that was modest but flattering. It laced up the back with silver cord, and when Margaret helped her into it, Arya barely recognized herself in the mirror. The girl looking back had clean hair that shone like spun silver in the firelight, had skin scrubbed pink and glowing, had eyes that looked more gray than colorless, framed by lashes that were darker than she remembered. The dress transformed her angular frame into something almost elegant, the color making her look less washed out and more ethereal. Oh, Beth breathed. You're lovely. Arya shook her head. I'm not. I'm just clean. You're both, Margaret said firmly. Now shoes. Beth, the soft leather boots, I think. And we'll need to do something about that bandage. It's too bulky under the sleeve. The next 20 minutes involved rewrapping her injured hand with thinner linen that still protected but didn't show as obviously. Claire found a pair of silver hairpins shaped like tiny wolves and used them to pull back the front sections of Arya's hair, leaving the rest to fall in damp waves down her back. Beth produced a small pot of lip balm that smelled like mint and made Arya's chapped lips feel human again. By the time they finished, Arya looked like a different person. Not noble exactly, but not a servant either. Something in between. Something undefined that made her stomach twist with anxiety, because undefined meant vulnerable, meant people wouldn't know how to treat her, meant she couldn't predict what would happen next. A knock at the door made all of them turn. Margaret went to answer it, and Arya heard a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. "I need to speak with the girl. Alone. Isolde." The beta's daughter pushed past Margaret before permission was granted, sweeping into the chamber like she owned it. She wore deep green silk that clung to her curves, her auburn hair, elaborately braided jewels glittering at her throat and wrists, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Leave us," Isolde commanded the maids. "We were told not to leave her alone," Margaret said, her voice respectful but firm. "And I'm telling you to leave. Unless you want to explain to my father why you disobeyed a direct order from a beta's daughter." Margaret looked at Arya, conflict clear on her face. Arya forced herself to nod. "It's all right, I'll be fine." The maids left reluctantly, and Arya was alone with the woman who had stabbed her with silver spoons, who had made her life hell for years, who looked at her now with undisguised hatred. "So," Isolde circled her like a predator. "The kitchen rat cleaned up nicely. I'm sure the king is very pleased with his new pet. What do you want, Isolde?" "What I want is for you to stop this charade before you embarrass yourself further." Isolde stopped in front of her, close enough that Arya could smell her rose oil perfume. "You actually think he cares about you, that this is real?" He invoked the blood price statute. "Because you saved his life, and he's honorable enough to follow ancient law. That's all this is. Obligation. In 30 days, when the statute expires, he'll send you back to the kitchens with a bag of gold and a pat on the head. You'll be nothing again." The words hit like physical blows because they echoed every fear Arya had been trying to ignore, every doubt that whispered in the dark corners of her mind. "Why do you care what happens to me?" "I don't." Isolde smiled sharp as a blade. "But I care about the kingdom, about maintaining proper order, about not having a wolfless Omega disrupt centuries of tradition because she got lucky once. Then you have nothing to worry about." Arya kept her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "In 30 days I'll be gone. You'll get what you want." "Will I?" Isolde leaned closer. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the king is getting attached. Looking at you with those pathetic puppy eyes. Calling you his mate when everyone knows that's impossible. You're going to break his heart, little rat. And when you do, when you prove you can't handle this world and run back to your safe little kitchen, he's going to be left looking like a fool." "I would never hurt him." The words came out fierce. True. The one thing Arya was certain of in all this chaos. You'll hurt him just by existing in his life. Isolde straightened, smoothing her silk skirts. "You can't be what he needs. Can't stand beside him at council meetings, or negotiate with allied pacts, or produce heirs strong enough to hold the kingdom. You're a pretty distraction that will cost him respect and power the longer you stay." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I've known Daemon since we were children. I've watched him sacrifice everything for this kingdom, for the pack. When it comes down to choosing between you and his duty, we both know which one he'll pick. Save yourself the humiliation and leave before he has to make that choice." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Arya stood frozen in the middle of the beautiful chamber in her beautiful dress, feeling like a child playing pretend in her mother's clothes. Everything Isolde had said crashed over her in waves. The truth of it, the terrible, inescapable truth that she didn't belong here, couldn't survive here, would only drag Daemon down if she stayed. But beneath the fear, beneath the learned helplessness and self-doubt, something else stirred. Something that had been silent for so long, but was finally waking up. Her wolf. Not fully conscious yet, not able to speak clearly, but present. Aware. And absolutely furious at Isolde's words. "Ours," the wolf whispered. "She threatens what is ours." The door opened again. Arya spun, expecting Isolde back to deliver more poison. Instead, Daemon filled the doorway, and the relief that flooded through her was so intense it made her knees weak. His eyes went wide as he took her in. The dress, the hair, the transformation from servant to something more. He crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands framing her face with a reverence that made her throat tight. "Look at you," he said, voice rough with emotion. "It's just the dress. It's you, too." His thumb stroked her cheekbones with impossible gentleness. "I've always seen this. The dress just lets everyone else see what I've known for years." Arya's vision blurred. Isolde was here. His expression darkened. "What did she say? That I'm going to hurt you, that I can't be what you need, that I should leave before you have to choose between me and the kingdom." She forced herself to meet his eyes. She's not wrong, Damon. I don't know how to be anything but a servant. Don't know how to navigate politics or stand beside you without making you look weak. Maybe she's right. Maybe I should. No. The word came out hard. Absolute. I don't care what Isolde thinks. I don't care what the council thinks. I care what you think, what you want. Do you want to leave? I don't know. The honest answer felt like failing. I'm terrified of this, of you, of wanting something I've never been allowed to want and having it destroyed. Then don't decide today. He pulled her against his chest and she went willingly, pressing her face into leather and warmth and the scent of wood smoke and iron that was becoming as familiar as breathing. We have 30 days. Use them to figure out what you want, not what you think you should want, not what would make the council happy. What would make you happy? What if I don't know how to be happy? The question came out muffled against his shirt. Then I'll teach you. His hand stroked her hair, the gesture soothing and possessive at once. The same way you'll teach me how to be worthy of someone as brave as you. They stood like that for a learning moment, wrapped in each other, while the sun tracked across the floor and the castle hummed with life beyond the walls. Arya felt his heartbeat steady against her cheek, felt his hand gentle in her hair, felt safe in a way that was becoming dangerously addictive. Come with me, Damon said finally. I want to show you something. He led her through corridors she had never seen, past guards who bowed to them both, through a heavy oak door that opened onto a stone staircase spiraling upward. They climbed for what felt like forever, Arya's legs burning by the time they reached the top. The door at the summit opened onto a training courtyard built into the mountain itself. Straw dummies lined one wall. Weapon racks held swords and daggers and staffs. The space was empty, the afternoon training session clearly finished, leaving them alone in the cold mountain air. I told you I'd teach you to protect yourself, Damon said, moving to the weapon racks. If you're going to be under my protection, if you're going to stand beside me in any capacity you need to know how to defend yourself when I'm not there. He selected 2 daggers, simple and balanced, made for utility rather than decoration. He crossed back to her, pressing one into her good hand. Feel the weight. Get used to how it balances. Arya held the dagger awkwardly. She had never held a weapon before. Servants weren't allowed. I don't know how. That's why I'm teaching you. He moved behind her, his body warm against her back, his arms coming around to adjust her grip. Like this, firm but not strangling. You want control, not desperation. His hands guided hers, showing her the proper position. Arya tried to focus on the lesson, on the dagger, and the stance and the instructions he murmured in her ear. But his proximity made thinking difficult, made breathing difficult. The heat of him, the scent of him, the way his chest pressed against her back with each breath, all of it overwhelmed her senses until the dagger was just an excuse to be close. Now, Damon said, his voice dropping lower, if someone comes at you from the front, you don't try to overpower them. You're smaller, lighter. You use that. You're faster, more agile. You strike where they're vulnerable and you run. He demonstrated, moving her through the basic strikes. Throat, eyes, groin, anything that would drop an attacker long enough for her to escape. The movements felt foreign, impossible. She had spent so long making herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. Everything he was teaching her went against every survival instinct she had developed. I can't do this, she said after the 10th failed attempt. I can't be aggressive, can't attack. I'm not built that way. You attacked a guard twice your size to save me, Damon countered. You moved without thinking, without calculating, without fear. You have that instinct, Arya. You just need to trust it. He repositioned her, his hands on her hips, this time correcting her stance. The touch sent electricity up her spine, made her wolf surge against the surface of her consciousness with an intensity that stole her breath. Again, Damon said, throat then run, show me. Arya moved through the sequence, stepped forward, brought the practice dagger up toward the imaginary attacker's throat. But her movement was too slow, too hesitant. She knew it even before Damon caught her wrist. You're thinking too much, he said. Predators don't think, they react. Your body knows what to do. You proved that in the Great Hall. You just need to stop second-guessing yourself. He guided her through the motion again and again. Each time his hands on her body, teaching her the muscle memory. Each time the heat between them building until Arya wasn't sure if her racing heart was from exertion or proximity. On the 7th attempt, something clicked. Her body moved before her mind caught up. The strike was fast, clean. the practiced blade stopping exactly where it would have connected with an attacker's throat. There, Damon breathed, his hand still on her waist. That's it. That's the woman who saved a king. Arya turned in his arms, suddenly breathless. His face was so close. His golden eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her forget the dagger, the lesson, everything except the fact that she wanted to kiss him. Wanted it with a desperation that terrified her. He leaned in. She could feel his breath on her lips, could see the exact moment he decided to close the distance. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, her first kiss, with an Alpha King, in a training yard on top of a mountain. Impossible. Perfect. A scream ripped through the mountain air. Both of them froze. The sound came from below, from the lower courtyard where the stable hands worked. A child's scream, high, terrified, pain. Damon moved first, vaulting over the training yard wall with inhuman speed. Arya dropped the dagger and ran after him, her heart hammering for entirely different reasons now. Down the stone steps, two at a time, her new boots slipping on worn rock. She grabbed the railing to keep from falling, her bandaged hand protesting, but she didn't slow down. The scene in the lower courtyard made her stomach lurch. A boy, 11, maybe 12, sandy hair matted with sweat, lay screaming on the ground. His leg was caught in a massive bear trap, the iron jaws buried deep in flesh. Blood pooled on the cobblestone, spreading fast. Too fast. Finn, one of the stable masters, knelt beside the boy, hands hovering uselessly. Don't move, don't move. Someone get a healer. But Arya knew, the way the blood pulsed with each heartbeat, the angle of the bone protruding through torn skin. The trap had severed the main artery. By the time a healer arrived from the medical wing, Finn would be dead. He had minutes, maybe less. Her feet carried her forward before her mind caught up. She dropped to her knees beside the boy, ignoring the blood soaking into her new dress, ignoring Damon's sharp command to wait for the healers, ignoring the 20 servants and guards gathering, watching with horrified faces. Her hands moved to the trap. The metal was cold, cruel. She could see purple shimmer along the edges. Poison. Of course, this wasn't an accident. Someone had set this trap. Someone who knew the paths the servants used. Someone who had meant this for her. The realization came with crystal clarity. This was Isolde's work, or Corvin's. A message, a warning. Get too comfortable in your new life and the people around you suffer. Arya, don't, Damon started, but her hands were already glowing. Purple light erupted from her palms, bright enough to make the onlookers gasp and step back, bright enough to paint the stone walls violet. Arya didn't know what she was doing, didn't know how. She just knew that Finn was dying and her wolf was screaming to save him, and her hands were burning with power that had been locked away for so long she had forgotten it existed. The light poured into the wound. The trap's jaws groaned metal, protesting as if compelled by invisible hands. Arya's fingers closed around the iron teeth and pulled. The trap opened. She shouldn't have been strong enough, shouldn't have been able to move it, but the purple light gave her strength beyond human limits. She ripped the trap away, tossed it aside with a clang that echoed off stone, pressed her glowing hands directly to the mangled flesh. She felt it, felt the artery knitting back together, cell by cell, felt bone fragments aligning, fusing, felt muscle and skin weaving like she was stitching with threads of pure light. The purple glow intensified until she couldn't see anything except the boy's leg and her own hands and the impossible thing happening between them. Finn's screams had stopped. He stared at her with wide eyes, shock and awe warring on his young face. The stable master had gone silent. Everyone had gone silent. The only sound was Arya's ragged breathing and the soft hum of power flowing through her hands. Then it was done. The glow faded. Arya swayed, suddenly exhausted. The world tilted sideways. Strong hands caught her Damon's hands. But she didn't look at him, she looked at Finn. The boy sat up slowly, as if testing whether his body would obey. His leg was whole, scarred, pink new tissue where the trap had been, standing out against his skin like a brand, but whole. He flexed his foot, bent his knee, rotated his ankle. No pain crossed his features, just wonder. You healed me, Finn whispered. His voice cracked with emotion. I felt it. I felt you put me back together. The courtyard had gone dead silent. Arya became aware of the audience. 20 pairs of eyes stared at her hands, at the boy who should have been dead, bleeding out on cold stone, but who was now climbing to his feet and testing his weight on a leg that had been destroyed moments ago. A guard spoke first, his voice shaking. What are you, She's a healer. Margaret pushed through the crowd, her eyes bright with tears. The old magic. My grandmother told stories, but I never thought. She dropped to her knees in front of Arya. Thank you. Finn is my nephew. Thank you. Others began to kneel. The stable master, the guards, the servants who had gathered. One by one they dropped to their knees on blood-soaked stone, bowing to the girl who had just performed a miracle. But Arya barely noticed, because standing at the back of the crowd, half hidden in the shadow of the stable entrance, was Isolde. The beta's daughter's face had gone pale as fresh snow. Her green eyes were wide with something that looked like fear. She met Arya's gaze across the courtyard, and Arya saw the exact moment realization hit. She has power, Isolde breathed, the words carried in the sudden silence. Ancient power. Then Isolde turned and ran. Arya tried to stand to go after her, but her legs wouldn't support her weight. The healing had taken everything. She collapsed against Damon's chest, trembling with exhaustion. Let her go, Damon murmured into her hair. His arms tightened around her, protective and possessive. She's going to Corvin, going to tell him what she saw, which means the game just changed. I didn't mean to, Arya started. You saved a child's life. Damon's voice was fierce, proud. You did exactly what you were meant to do, and every person here just witnessed it. He was right. The kneeling crowd wasn't just showing respect. They were bearing witness. 20 people who could testify that Arya Thorne, the wolfless servant, had power that rivaled the ancient healers of legend. Power that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. Can you walk? Damon asked softly. I don't think so. Then I carry you. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. To the crowd he said, what you saw here stays quiet until I say otherwise. Is that understood? Yes, Your Majesty, they chorused. Good. Margaret, take Finn to the medical wing. Have the healers examine him, make sure the work is complete, and someone clean up this blood before it draws attention. The crowd scattered to obey. Damon turned and began carrying Arya back toward the castle, taking a side entrance that would keep them away from the main halls, away from prying eyes. That was Isolde's trap, Arya said as they climbed stairs. It was meant for me. I know. Damon's jaw was set in a hard line, which means she's getting desperate. Desperate enough to hurt innocent people to get to you. She'll tell Corvin, tell the whole council. They'll say I'm dangerous, that I should be locked up or exiled, or they can try. Damon shouldered open the door to her chamber, carried her inside, laid her gently on the bed. But the law is clear. You saved that boy's life. Healing is the rarest gift, the most precious. They can't punish you for it without violating every code we have. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hand finding hers, the one that wasn't bandaged, the one that still tingled with a residual power. Besides, you just proved Isolde wrong, proved the whole council wrong. You're not worthless. You are not broken. You have a gift that most wolves would kill for. I'm terrified, Arya admitted. Her voice came out small. I don't know how to control it. Don't know when it will happen again or what it means. What if I hurt someone by accident? What if... Then we figure it out together. Damon lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. That's what the 30 days are for. To learn, to grow, to discover what you're capable of. Isolde said you'll have to choose between me and the kingdom. Isolde doesn't know what she's talking about. His golden eyes held hers steady and sure. You're not separate from the kingdom, Arya. You're part of it, a healer who can save lives that would otherwise be lost. That's not a threat to the pack. That's a blessing. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. And for what it's worth, if it ever comes down to a choice between you and a throne, I choose you every time. The kingdom survived before I was born, and it'll survive after I'm gone. But there's only one you. Only one woman brave enough to throw herself in front of poison for a king she barely knew. Only one person who makes me want to be more than just the scarred wolf. Tears slipped down Arya's cheeks. I don't understand why you care so much. Because you're mine. The words came out simple, certain. My mate, my heart, mine in every way that matters. And I've waited 32 years to find you. I'm not letting you go because some jealous beta's daughter thinks she knows better. Arya's wolf surged at the words. Not gently, not quietly. The animal rose inside her like a tidal wave, pressing against her skin with such force that Arya gasped. Her vision flickered. For a brief, dizzying moment, she saw the world through different eyes, saw colors she had never seen before, smelled Damon's scent not just as wood smoke and iron, but as something deeper, richer. Mate, pack, home. Damon, she whispered. My wolf, it's... I know. Wonder filled his voice. I can feel it. It's waking up, finally waking up after all these years. The wolf retreated, but not far, not back into the deep silence where it had lived since childhood. It stayed close to the surface, now watchful and aware, waiting. What does this mean? Arya asked. It means the nightshade is finally out of your system. Means my blood burned away the last of the poison. Means you're not wolfless, Arya. You never were. Your wolf was just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to emerge. When will it happen, the shift? I don't know. Damon stroked her hair with infinite gentleness. Could be days, could be weeks. But when it does, I'll be here. I'll help you through it. You won't be alone. A knock at the door interrupted them. Damon called permission to enter, and Margaret slipped inside, her face flushed. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but the council has called an emergency session. They're demanding your presence immediately. Let them demand. Damon didn't move from Arya's side. I'll attend when I'm ready. They're threatening to invoke the challenge clause if you don't appear within the hour. Margaret's voice was apologetic. Corvin is making a formal accusation against Arya. Claims she used dark magic to bewitch you and endanger the pack. Damon's expression went cold. Dangerous. Dark magic. Of course he does. Can't admit that a servant has more value than his snake of a daughter. You have to go, Arya said quietly. If you don't, they'll use it against you. Say you're unfit to rule. I don't give a damn what they say. But I do. Arya pushed herself upright despite her exhaustion. I won't be the reason you lose your throne. Go. Defend me properly. Show them the law. Show them that healing isn't dark magic, it's the oldest gift our kind has. Damon looked like he wanted to argue, but after a long moment he nodded. You're right, they need to see this handled by law, not by emotion. He stood, but his hand lingered on her shoulder. Margaret stays with you. Don't answer the door for anyone else. And if Isolde tries to come back, you send for me immediately. I will. I mean it, Arya. Whatever happens in that council chamber, whatever they say or threaten, I'm coming back to you. Nothing they do will change that. He leaned down, pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle, reverent. Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the corridor with the decisive stride of a king going to war. Margaret closed the door behind him and turned to Arya with a complicated expression. You should rest. The healing took a lot out of you. I can't rest. Arya swung her legs over the edge of the bed. They're going to try to destroy me in that chamber. I need to be ready. Ready for what? For whatever comes next. Arya looked down at her hands. They weren't glowing anymore, but she could still feel the power thrumming beneath her skin. Alive. Awake. Waiting. Isolde was right about one thing. I can't be what Damon needs if I don't understand what I am. And I can't understand what I am unless I stop being afraid of it. She looked up at Margaret, the late queen. She had gifts, didn't she? That's why she believed in the old magic. That's why she would have understood. Margaret's eyes widened. How did you know? Damon said she would have seen in me what he sees. That only makes sense if she was like me. The older woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. The queen had the sight, could see things before they happened. Dreams that came true. Visions of the future. The council hated it, called her unstable. But the king loved her anyway. Protected her, just like his son is protecting you. Did it help the sight? Did it save her in the end? No, Margaret's voice was sad. She saw her own death 3 days before the fever took her. Told the king, told young Damon. They tried everything to prevent it, but some things can't be changed. Some things are written in stone. Arya absorbed this. So Damon knows that loving someone with power doesn't always have a happy ending. And he's choosing you anyway. Margaret moved to the wardrobe, began pulling out a different dress. Which is why you need to fight for this. For him, for yourself. Because that man has given everything to this kingdom. He deserves someone who gives everything back. She held up a dress of deep forest green, simpler than the blue but elegant. We need to get you out of the bloody one, and then we need to make sure you look like someone who belongs beside a king when he comes back from that council meeting. You think he'll win? I think he's never lost a fight that mattered. Margaret smiled. And you matter more than anything else in his world right now. So yes, he'll win, but you need to be ready for what happens after. Arya let Margaret help her change, let her clean the blood from her hands, let her fix her hair. But her mind was elsewhere, in the council chamber, with Damon, wondering what Corvin was saying, what accusations he was leveling, what proof Isolde had manufactured. The wolf stirred inside her, restless, protective. It didn't like being separated from its mate, didn't like the threat hanging over them both. Patience, Arya thought to the wolf. He'll come back, he promised. The wolf settled slightly, but its attention remained fixed on the door. Waiting. An hour passed, then two. The sun tracked across the floor, painting the chamber in shades of orange and gold. Margaret brought food, but Arya couldn't eat. Brought tea, but it went cold, untouched. Finally, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, the door opened. Daemon stood in the doorway, and the look on his face made Arya's heart stop. Not defeat, not exactly, but not victory either. Something complicated, something that meant everything was about to change. Tell me, Arya said. He crossed to her, pulled her into his arms, held her so tightly she could barely breathe. Against her hair, he spoke words that would reshape her world. The council has agreed to let you stay, but they've set conditions. Challenges you have to meet to prove you're worthy of your place here. To prove you're worthy of me. What kind of challenges? The old trials, the ones they used to give to Omegas who wanted to mate above their station. Tests of courage, wisdom, and strength. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. If you pass, they'll accept our bond. If you fail, I go back to the kitchens. No. His voice was fierce. If you fail, we leave, together. I'll abdicate the throne, and we'll go somewhere the council's rules don't matter. You can't. I can, and I will. But Arya, I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're going to show them exactly how strong you are, how brave, how worthy of standing beside any wolf in this kingdom, including me. Arya's throat tightened. When do the trials start? Tomorrow at dawn. He cupped her face in his hands. But tonight you rest, you gather your strength. And you remember that no matter what happens, you're not alone. You have me. You have your wolf waking up inside you. You have power they can't even begin to understand. His thumb stroked her cheekbones. And you have something none of them will ever have. A heart pure enough to save a child without thinking twice. Courage enough to face poison for a king. Love enough to want me despite my scars. I don't want you despite them, Arya whispered. I want you because of them. Because they show me you've survived. You've fought. You've lived. And you're still here. Daemon's expression cracked. Just for a moment, the king disappeared, and she saw the man beneath. Vulnerable, aching, desperately in love with a servant girl who shouldn't matter, but somehow meant everything. He kissed her then, not gentle, not careful, with all the pent-up longing of 4 years watching her from across rooms, with the desperation of a man who had finally found his mate and refused to let her go. His hands tangled in her hair, his mouth claiming hers with a possession that made her wolf howl with joy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless Arya realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of the council, not even of the trials waiting for her at dawn. Because Daemon Blackwell, the scarred wolf, the Iron King, the most dangerous creature in the Blood Moon Kingdom, knelt in front of her and called her worthy. And deep inside her chest, where a wolf had slept for so long in poisoned silence, something golden and fierce opened both eyes. Not just awake now, ready. The 30 days had just begun. But Arya Thorne was done being invisible, done being afraid, done letting others define her worth. Tomorrow she would show the council what a servant could become, what a wolfless girl with a pure heart and ancient power could do when she finally stopped apologizing for existing. Tomorrow she would fight. But tonight, wrapped in the arms of a king who loved her scars as much as she loved his Arya, let herself believe in impossible things. Let herself believe in happy endings. Let herself believe she was finally truly home.